Alright, hello everybody. Today I'm going to be making a video on my Druid on the Mythic Plus Invitational, and this first video is basically just going to be about my character setup, so what talents, what gear I use for specific pools, when I use them, and why I use them. So first off, I'm really going to be going over the talents. Now the interesting talent that I took over probably a lot of people was Cenarian Ward over Abundance. And this was mainly to do with what tank we were running in our comp. So because we're running a Brewmaster Monk, it's a tank that is able to very easily smooth damage. So having a really powerful hot like Cenarian Ward that you can extend, that you can use something like the Braces to constantly keep extending Cenarian Ward and get this really large amount of healing, is basically why I took it. It's purely based around the tank I took. You'll find if you're running like something like a DK tank who's mostly able to self-sustain, and doesn't really need more spike healing as opposed to consistent healing, you'll most often find those groups running Abundance to get the increased regrowth healing over Cenarian Wood. So that's the main reason behind the choice. It's again purely just because of the Monk tank. It does have some niche uses, like on Desseron you're able to pre-apply it to a target, and it basically means that target will 100% live the knockback and stuff. So it does have some niche uses on some bosses, and again it is mostly a preference thing, the tier 15. But that's why I chose it, is because of the Monk tank. The rest of the talents are pretty standard. I choose Guardian Affinity for DHT, but I was switching between Feral Affinity on some keys like Quarter Stars and Vault of the Wardens, where there's a lot of heavy AoE and there's not really that much damage going out in the packs. But generally for fortified keys, you can get away with running Feral Affinity and you can do some pretty fun swipe damage, but on tyrannical keys I think Guardian Affinity is the way to go. The other talent that's really in contention is Flourish versus Moment of Clarity. Because I took Cenarian Ward, Flourish is the obvious choice because you just extend it. Now when it comes down to gear, now there is basically one way I would suggest you to gear your Resto Druid when it comes to Mythic Plus, and that is full Haste Mastery gear. So I'll run into a dungeon now and I'll kind of show you what stats I was running, because you do get scaled up. So I was running a full Mastery Haste set of gear, purely just because Mastery is the best stat you can have in terms of healing in a Mythic Plus environment, because you have a lot of hots on your targets. So Mastery, just raw throughput, and then Haste. Now the reason I go with a lot of Haste over something like Crit or Versatility, where Crit and Versatility are actually weighted pretty high, I think even higher than in Crit if you get out your RDSW. It's purely just because of how much more valuable it is to actually be able to be preemptive before mechanics, and how much more valuable it is in a Mythic Plus environment to be able to react quickly to specific things. So therefore Haste is just a lot more valuable. If you can walk into a pack and have 10 rejuves instead of 8 rejuves, that's a pretty big deal, because those extra 2 rejuves means you're then going to be doing 30% more healing onto the targets that would have had those rejuves, because of how high your mastery is. So that is why I preference Haste over other stats like Crit and Versatility, even though Crit and Versatility might actually be higher for raw throughput. Now when it comes to legendaries, I have a basic default setup, and that is with Prydaz and the Dark Titan's Advice. So I think these are my healing meters for the overall. So as you'll see, Life Bloom is my top healing. In the actual logs you can see that Life Bloom, I think it's about 11% of my healing comes from the Dark Titan's Advice. Now this is kind of accentuated because again of the Monk tank, because they're able to smooth damage, and the Dark Titan's Advice is extremely good for being able to heal them. But just in general, the Dark Titan's Advice is probably the best Mythic Plus Legendary on any kind of respectable key where the tank is taking damage, because it pretty much just lets you AFK heal the tank just with a Life Bloom. So if I'm ever worried about the healing on a pack, I will be running the Dark Titan's Advice. And then for my second legendary, I most of the time just default to Prydaz. That's just because it has a really high amount of secondary stats. It is triple statted, so it's over budgeted. And then the shield is obviously a really high throughput. When it comes to other legendaries, I typically, you know, if I was doing something like Medivh, for example, in Upper Karazen, I'd use something like Velens over Prydas, and even something like the shoulders, but it is, you know, pretty niche situations that I don't use just Velens and Prydas. Prydas and the Dark Titan's Advice. They're basically, if I'm coming into any pack where I know there's going to be a lot of healing, they're the default two. And then, you know, the things like Velens, you know, is good for things like, what's it called? Bursting. You know, being able to put out a big Velens heal on every bursting pack. So Velens does have a lot of uses, but just for the affixes we're running, and just for, you know, cookie cutter spec, I would run Prydas, Dark Titan's Advice. Now, when it comes in terms of trinkets, the Deceiver's Grand Design is essentially a cheat death. It is probably the best Mythic Plus trinket you can be using. It has a lot of mastery on it, which is really nice for your healing, and the proc, the actual throughput, is pretty good too. But the biggest thing you're concerned about obviously is the shield that comes from it. You know, from these first packs on these Tigers, you'll see that I will upload my POV of the DHT we did. You know, I have 4 of these trinkets out on the first starting pack. Anytime a Nightclaw will pounce to somebody, they'll get the trinket proc straight away, and it'll just be like they're on full HP again, just with a huge absorb on them. So that's why the trinket is so good. Now, because on the Mythic Tournament Dungeon Invitational Realm, we did have access to literally every single trinket in the game. So I did run a mixture of different trinkets for a lot of different packs. I know there's been a couple conversations about me not using tier 24 piece, and I will kind of explain why that is. So I should explain as well that in my basic healing set, I am running 2-piece, 4-piece, basically just anything with high mastery. And that, you know, that was my main intention. Everything's scaled to 935 in these dungeons, so as you can see, you know, you have 2 pieces of gear that have 935 that are tier 19, so that's why I'm using the helm and chest, because they just have high mastery, and then the other pieces are all the pieces that have high mastery. So now if we look at the DPS gear I was using, you can see all my little sets around here. So Prydas and the Dark Titan's Advice is my standard healing one. If ever we were coming into a tank healing fight, so for example on Oakheart, I would be using this set where I'd equip a Mastery neck and you'd be using the wrist. This would allow me to get a 16-second Cenarian Ward on the tank, basically being able to, you know, they can passively heal through the grip, the crushing grip, if they had a Cenarian Ward on them. And basically what I was actually trying, you know, most of the time doing in the Invitational is when the tank got gripped, I would actually be, you know, there'd be so much healing on the tank that would be, you know, the most advantageous time for me to run around and break roots and go shift roots. So you'll see me doing that a lot when I actually upload my POV, is that I will be extending the Cenarian Ward and doing other things during that time. So that's why I'm using, that's a situation I use the wrists in. Now the other one will be I'm using Kill Jaden's Burning Wish and Umbral Glaive with a Prydas. Now this is what I use for any big pull, so you'll see at the start of the DHT run we did, we pulled these 3 here, we pulled the next pack, we pulled the bear. I would run in, so my plan for the start of that run would be to run in, I would drop my Glaive, I would drop Kill Jaden's Burning Wish, and then a Ursol's Vortex, and then kind of run away again. And that's just essentially to get out a lot of DPS sets. Now this set is set up specifically to have really high mastery, and that is because typically when we're doing big pulls, I just want to be chucking down my trinkets and then actually needing to do healing. So that's why this set of gear is actually set up with mastery gear, because it's not a full DPS set, because I know that at any time where I'm going to be using this set, there's likely going to be a lot of healing. So that's why I'm still running a very high amount of mastery in this gear set. Now my next gear set is what you'll see me running for basically most of the trash, any trash without Night Claws in them. In, you know, basically every dungeon that doesn't have any deadly pack, I will actually be running Lady and the Child, Dark Titan's Advice, and then Plague Hive and Shock Baton. and that is essentially just so I have a really high average DPS across the entire dungeon. Being able to apply 2 Moonfires, having a crazy amount of damage from Plague Hive and Shock Baton means that as a Resto Druid I can put out a very significant amount of damage across the entire dungeon. So you can see in a DHT where there are actually quite a lot of very dangerous mobs, my average DPS is about 330k. This is probably a bit on the low side. I think I can probably bump that up to about 400k if I was doing a bit better. So that, there's definite improvements there. I think this is over another couple dungeons because we do have a warrior in here. So yeah, this is just not for the DHT, but you can see that I'm averaging, about 330k, and that's just across all dungeons at a plus 17 level. So I do manage to get a fairly significant amount of damage. And this set of gear has a bit of haste, a bit of crit, and a little bit of mastery. It's a bit of a mix between what stats, because you do want to do some healing, you don't want to drop all your mastery, but you do want to have some haste, some crit, so you are actually putting out a lot of damage, because the idea of the set is to be a DPS set. So you'll see on a lot of packs that I'm sustaining like 600k DPS in ones that I'm actually doing damage on. So that's when this set comes in handy. The last set is just basically this set with an owl. So if there's any single mob where I'm looking to burst down, Quarter Stars for example is a perfect one. There's lots of singular mobs you want to be doing, so I just swap out my Plague Hive for a Medallion. So the last set obviously then is my kitty form, basically just Lady and the Child and the ring for that swipe DPS on the cat druid. So again, this set, just crit haste, just allows you to get off a lot of swipes, and it's kind of whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of the setup for my druid. So as you can see, there's a lot of thought that goes into a lot of things I was doing. You'll see me switching between a lot of gear sets and pumping out a lot of damage, pumping out a lot of healing. And that's just, being prepared for the dungeon and knowing what's coming for the dungeon. So hopefully soon I'll upload a POV, and I think I'll do a voiceover of our DHT run and some of our practice runs and where it went wrong and whatnot, just to kind of show off the thought process of what went into the runs we were doing. And yeah, so I hope you learned something. I hope you can kind of translate some of this gear advice and talent advice and whatnot into your Mythic Dungeon runs. Obviously you're not going to be, I think damage is something that's a bit overrated in the current, like if you're doing dungeon runs on live, because your healer damage is not as important. Your best thing you can be doing for your group is just being consistent, staying alive and keeping other people alive. So hopefully some of the advice about the generic cookie cutter gear sets I was using will help you. If you want me to do any content or have some questions, let me know, and I'll be sure to get onto it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and hope you learned.